Welcome back. Joining me now is best-selling author Douglas Murray. Douglas, it's been a good week for vulnerable gender-confused children in the UK, with the NHS banning puberty blockers for minors, and it's been a good week, I've got to say, also for all the courageous souls from both the left and the right of the political spectrum who fought at considerable personal cost against these gender-affirming care models. That's got a pretty sounding name, but these policies have been proven over and over again to be harmful.
That's absolutely right, Rita. I've said to you before, one of my rules is assume that because everybody and every age in the past did things that we are just amazed and horrified by, don't just look at what those things were in the past, but look at the things that we might be doing today that people who come after us will look at with equal bafflement and horror. And I've said for years that one such thing is likely to be the medicalization. One thing that our own successors will look at us with just bafflement over was that people going through childhood in our societies, in our highly developed, very, very liberal democratic societies, children going through ordinary childhood experiences of problems with their bodies, worries about their bodies, worries about their future, were being medicalized. And secondly, that they were being medicalized with consequences they were not informed about. And in some cases, because the doctors knew and didn't think it was helpful to tell them, and in other cases, because the medical literature just wasn't there yet. In other words, our societies were experimenting on children with no knowledge of what would happen. Well, in recent years, we have learned from proper medical studies some of the things that can happen. You mentioned the niceness of the sounding of some of these things. It's all gender affirmation or puberty blockers, as if you just block puberty. No, the puberty blockers that many people, many children were given have made them infertile for life. In other words, they made some kind of uninformed, half-informed child decision. We don't allow children to choose to smoke or to drink alcohol or to get a tattoo, but they were allowed and sometimes encouraged to go on a pathway which had irreversible changes on their entire life. And so, yes, as you say, maybe it is a moment when sanity has returned.
Well, it's returned in the UK, but we've been saying on this program for some time, Douglas, Australia is fast becoming an outlier. We're blindly following this gender-affirming model without any thorough investigation of the many harms identified in the UK. It's really a question, I think, here of political courage. And sadly, our supposedly conservative politicians in this country lack the backbone to push back against this ideology.
Well, whatever the causes are, we just have to look at the facts. You know, when I first wrote about this some years ago, I just decided to do it by going in and looking at the facts. What were the papers that existed? What were the studies that existed? One of the things that alarmed me very early on, as it alarmed a lot of people, principally, it has to be said, women of left and right who picked up this issue far more, I think, than some of their male counterparts, and who deserve enormous credit and who walked through unbelievable opprobrium and insult for just doing basic things like looking at the facts. One of the things I was startled by always was that some of these procedures, some of these drugs were being administered when there was almost no knowledge about the consequences, that there were so few studies, that there was so little literature, so little information, and yet that our societies have fallen into this place where we sort of just done something I think will be looked at, as I say, as very, very wrong. That we did it out of kindness. We did it out of a sort of let's all live together, let's all be kind, let's all be nice. But sometimes it requires so-called niceness to do a very wicked thing. And I think that's likely to be the case in this whole area. There was a book, there's just a book out by one of the forebears, one of the enablers of this whole movement, the unreadable American academic Judith Butler. She's written another book about gender, and a lot of the people who it's been torn apart by all the smarter reviewers like Sarah Dittam and various others. It's Kathleen Stock did a scorching review of it yesterday. But some of the sort of people who are still in the same movement as Judith Butler have actually said in their reviews, yes, this is going to be hard. Yes, we're going to have to push through. But yes, we have to medicalize all the children if that's what they want, because it's better than the alternative. In actual fact, the studies we have about alternatives, the studies we have about, always people have been saying things like suicide rates of minors if they're not allowed to transition. The studies we have on these sorts of things suggest that not only do suicide rates stay the same, but they actually increase after so-called attempts at transitioning. This has been a profound challenge, not just to the morality, but to the decency of our societies. And we should have approached it with care and with love, but also with our eyes open and an eye on the facts. And because of the care and love bit, a lot of people, including people in positions of extreme power, turned away from the facts, and they will have to live with that.
Now, Douglas, I want to ask you about Scotland. What is happening in Scotland? They've passed a new hate crime bill that will create new offences of stirring up hatred against protected groups, with even conversations that take place in the privacy of homes around the dinner table now under the law. So a person could be charged with a hate crime for something they say during a dinner party. Something to look forward to, Douglas?
Yes, absolutely. Book your tickets to Scotland now, Rita. It's an extraordinary thing, not least to happen in the country that of all the Enlightenments gave us what I regard as being the greatest of the Enlightenments. Scotland produced some of the finest philosophers of the 18th and 19th centuries. They gave us free markets, free thought, and much more. To see Scotland, my own Scotland, reduced to this is really pitiful. And there's a lot to be said for it. But one thing, of course, Rita, is people try out ideas around the dinner table. People make jokes around dinner tables, and people have a laugh around dinner tables. And as I say, they form ideas. They try things out. That may be different from speaking on air or speaking to a rally. It is different. Now, whether or not anything on air or to a rally at an event should be policed is quite a separate question. I don't think it particularly should. But around a dinner table, the amazing thing about this, Rita, is that all of the people who would do this, we have to ask that same question that my late great friend Christopher Hitchens beautifully put in Toronto in 2006, when the Canadian government was pushing through speech laws that would police the speech of Canadians, which is essentially the question is, who would you nominate to be the person in your society so right, so correct, so just, and so good that they could decide what you or I or anyone else is allowed to think and read, and on this occasion, say around our own dinner table? Who's your nominee? Do you have anyone? I don't have anyone, Rita. I could never come up with such a person. There are brilliant people. There are kind people. There are well-read people. But who would be the person who you would nominate to decide what could be said at any dinner table and all dinner tables in the land? And the answer is there is no such person. We tried this sort of thing in Europe in the past. We tried having inquisitions. We tried having a clerical class who decided for the better of the public what the public could know, read, and say. It didn't work out. And the Scottish Enlightenment, among other things, freed the people of Scotland and the world from those kinds of superstitions. And yet here we are, it seems, back again. And so it'll only be stopped if enough people say, no, no, this isn't Scotland and this isn't freedom.
Now, before I get to Kategate, and sadly I do have to ask you about Kategate, let's have a look at the rise of the right across Europe. We've talked previously about the rise of right-wing parties and leaders from Sweden to Hungary to the Netherlands and now Portugal. With the right there, or the far right if you prefer, has come roaring back at Sunday's election. The far right is once again set to play a major role in the country's political future. That's the headline. The national elections were won by the centre-right Democratic Alliance coalition, Douglas, but it is the performance of the anti-immigration conservative Chega party that is alarming the establishment. You look at their rise, it's quite astonishing. They're now Portugal's third largest political force. They were only getting 1.3% of the vote back in 2019. Now they're up around 20%.
Yes, I mean, I think this is a familiar pattern, which you and I have looked at before, Rita. I mean, it's a familiar pattern, isn't it? If you don't address the issues that are very close to people's hearts, very close to their wallets, their pockets, their neighborhoods, if you don't address them, somebody will. And some of the parties that come along to do this are more or less palatable to me or to you, to many other people, but they will come along, of course. And this is just the latest example. Portugal, actually, it's very interesting. I haven't been there for a few years, but when I was last there, I noted that although Portugal gets quite a lot of people coming through it through illegal migration routes, a lot more leave to go north than in certain other countries in Europe. Britain, for instance, people tend to stay. So it has its own challenges, but even those challenges it faces, which are less than some of the Northern European countries and are far less than, for instance, America at the moment, they themselves are revolting against this system. And I would just, as always, beg the political class to listen to that and to take it seriously and not to denounce it and not to dismiss every critic and every voter as far right, because they have a concern which, frankly, 10, 20, or 20 years ago, was a concern that left-wing politicians uttered before the ballot, which centrist politicians uttered at the ballot, which Barack Obama said and Bill Clinton said in America. People have pathologized what used to be perfectly mainstream views and tried to make them all far right in recent years. And it's to the enormous detriment, actually, of the centrist parties.
You've been warning about this for many years yourself personally, The Strange Death of Europe. People who've read that fantastic book would know about these trends well. Now, I hesitate to ask you about this rather frivolous story. Only one could argue it's not as frivolous as it first seems. What is your take on the Kategate fake photo scandal? It has caused an almighty media storm. We've even got academic journals here in Australia writing about it. Every mainstream media outlet is crazy about it. Firstly, do you believe that Kate is responsible for those 16 editing errors that were identified, at least 16? What do you make of this bizarre story?
I can't understand it at all, Rita. I have to admit, I can't understand it at all. Maybe you can explain it to me. I just don't get it. First of all, the analysis of the photo, the minute it came out, I couldn't understand. It just seemed to me to be a happy family photo. But then, what is this photo editing thing, Pete? I've got to ask you.
I
What
don't
are the
know.
changes? What are the changes? Because I mean, if the allegation is, I don't know, that Kate looks totally different and she's edited herself, I suppose that makes sense. But they seem to be saying that all the photo is edited in different ways and people's legs are crossed in ways they wouldn't. I don't know. I don't quite know what people are trying to imply, and I wish they'd come out with it. Um, it's baffling to me. The one thing I would say is that it is probably a good example of why people in the public eye, particularly very prominently in the public eye, like royals, should be very careful about acceding to demands to sort of show themselves. If the Princess of Wales is ill, she clearly has been ill for some time. If this is the case, then it's probably best just to say, that remains the case, and not to release photos that have to be returned because they've been edited in some way. I think that it's very important, and the royals actually have learned this lesson in the past. It's actually very important not to accede to too much public pressure when there are private matters at stake. And if I was giving them advice, I would say, first of all, just try to bear in mind that you need to recover in your own time. Don't release photos, and don't unleash this blizzard of speculation online, because I've seen people go into sort of all sorts of mad corners, Rita, as I'm sure you have. And I think the explanation will simply be that a very nice and a young woman who's been serving her country is recovering, and that's it. And all the people who want to find evidence that the moon landing didn't happen from this photo, they're going to be disappointed.
Well, I've got to say, you and I are both naive, because when I first saw the photo, there was no suspicions of wrongdoing, or it could be fake or manipulated or any question marks. I was just like, oh, it's another nice photo of Kate and the kids.
Yes.
But here we are.
Right.
Now, Douglas Murray, I see you're in South Africa. I'll have to ask you about that next week, because South Africa and what's happening there, it is fascinating, it's disturbing. But thank you so much for your time this evening.
It's a great pleasure to be back with you. See you soon.